Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm going to be discussing my October TBR. Now for the month of October, there are so many books coming out this month that I want to read that most of my TBR is comprised of things that simply aren't even out yet. But let's go ahead and dive into the books themselves because there are quite a few of them. Starting off, I have to talk about The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. This series has taken over my life in a way I simply can't even perfectly articulate. I decided to finally check out book 1 last month. I liked it, but the ending was so explosive, I was like, I need to pick up book 2. And then I flew through book 2. It's just this compulsion while reading it, and it's almost like dampening my desire to literally read anything else because this series is all I can think about. Obviously, though, I need to read other books for content. So I'm struggling to try to decide if I should just give in, marathon it, and then move on, or savor it and drag it out through the last couple months of the year. So for my October TBR itself, I do have Ruin, which is book 3 of The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, but I also might add book 4 as well, which is Wraith. Both of these books are long. They take up a lot of time, but I am so invested within this series. But what is this series even about? The Faithful and the Fallen series is a very classic traditional fantasy setup. It's very multi-POV. I would almost describe the writing style reminds me a bit of The Wheel of Time, but the expansiveness of the politics and the intensity of the different points of views and how things really quickly escalate reminds me a bit of Game of Thrones, stylistically speaking. This series very much stands on its own, but I just thought I would provide those as context givers, if you will. This fantasy series is set in a world where 2,000 years prior to the start of the events of this novel, a huge conflict basically destroyed civilization, a war between humans and gods. And now this war is beginning to possibly rear its head once again. And specifically, there are two gods who are kind of trying to gather their forces, good and evil, to go against each other, and we're reading from characters who are very much involved into the fate of this conflict and are also a part of both sides of this conflict. You very quickly grow attached to some characters, very quickly begin to hate other characters, and it's just all-consuming, very, very intense, and just the plot really begins to pick up pace, especially after you finish book 1, which is where I'm at. It's classic in truly all of the best ways. I am wholly invested, and I might finish the entire thing in like a 4-week span, which is very fast for me. Normally it takes me a while to finish series. I kind of drag them out, but not this time, apparently. The next book that is on my TBR is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I am so pumped for this release. Something I didn't even realize until recently is that this is actually Cassandra Clare's adult fantasy debut. This is an adult fantasy novel and I am thrilled to read it. This is described as two outcasts basically getting pulled into a web of intrigue and politics, forbidden love, magic, all of those things I'm very much interested in. This book is set in the vibrant city of Castellane, and one thing has stayed consistent across criminals and nobles alike, and that is the desperate search for wealth, power, and the next hedonistic thrill. In this book, we're introduced to our two main characters. The first is Kel, who was basically taken as an orphan, and he has been transformed as an individual called the Swordcatcher, basically the body double to the prince in this realm. He has been raised his whole life to basically die for another. And then we also follow a character named Lynn, and she is a part of a small community that still has magical powers that are used predominantly for healing. By law, Lynn and her entire community is supposed to stay behind walls, but Lynn ventures out secretly to basically try to heal the general populace. Both of these characters, I think, cross paths and things begin to get complicated very, very quickly. I love Cassandra Clare's YA writing. I've always enjoyed her plots, her stories, her romances, so I am so excited to check out this new series. I also am not even sure if I've read anything by her that's not set in the Shadowhunter world, so this is just exciting on so many different fronts. The next book that's on my list is another fantasy sequel I hope to get to, and that is The Cage of Dark Hours by Marina Lostetter. This is a perfect fall October fantasy read because it combines fantasy and horror elements. The first book in this series is called The Helm of Midnight, and I really enjoyed it when I picked it up a few falls previous to this. But this series is set in a fantasy world where the magic system centers around objects. In particular, you can imbue items with power, and there's something called death masks in particular, where you can basically leave behind your skill, knowledge, and perspectives for other people to wear and harness. Our main character in this book is a regulator, and her job is to basically track, protect, and maintain some of the most dangerous magical artifacts that exist in this land. Unfortunately, though, at the beginning beginning of this book, a death mask of this world's most notorious serial killer has been stolen, and his killings begin to haunt the street once again, and our main character has to begin to investigate this crime. This book is really creepy, it's dark, it has a really interesting magic system full of politics, but also utilizes this sort of Jack the Ripper horror influence to great success too. I'm really excited to see how the plot is going to balloon carrying on with the rest of the series, because the first one ended rather explosively and I need to know what's going to happen next. Speaking of a good Halloween read, the next book I want to get to is Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments by T.L. Huchu. This is the sequel to The Library of the Dead, which I also read last year and really enjoyed. This is like a middle grade meets adult fantasy series. It's definitely mystery of the week vibes. It's set in the city of Edinburgh. However, though, it's kind of like in an alternative urban fantasy landscape where not only do ghosts and the paranormal like exist here, but also society is a little bit grimmer, a little bit darker, a little bit harder than our world. In this series, we follow our main character Ropa, who's a young girl who makes her living by connecting ghosts and their families, basically passing along like final rites, if you will. In book 1, she basically stumbles into a mystery which she works to solve, and in book 2, I believe we're going to be encountering an all-new mystery. I just love Ropa as a main character. She's headstrong, she's funny, she's endearing, and just seeing her kind of like problem solve and take on really difficult situations is just incredible. I also love the dark and mysterious streets of Edinburgh, which is where this book is set in. I think it adds incredible ambiance. These books to me are just a lot of fun. I find them kind of like perfect palate cleansers, and even though they are spooky, I still find them to be so charming that I think they're great reads to have between my more intense books, especially during this time of year. Next book I plan to read this month is God Killer by Hannah Kaner. This book I've seen everywhere, and I just feel like it's going to be an atmospheric, lyrical book that'll be perfect for the fall season. I'm also just truly obsessed with this cover, and I've been dying to read it since I picked it up a few months ago. This also centers one of my favorite kind of fantasy tropes, and that is an unlikely group of people forced to go on a quest together. In this book, we follow our main character, who is a god killer. That's how she makes her living, and she enjoys her job. But now she finds herself forced to go on a quest with a young noble and a god who has somehow bound himself to this young noble, and she's not allowed to kill him. They also pick up a few unlikely people along the way too. I feel like this is going to be funny, dark, mysterious, intense, basically all of the things I enjoy. The next book that's on my TBR is another book that is coming out this month, and that is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. To say that the early reviews are positive is an understatement. I feel like everyone is buzzing about this book, everyone is talking about this book, and looking at the synopsis, it also seems like one I could really enjoy. I've liked and read some of Ava Reed's other stories. I particularly like her writing style, but I haven't quite found one that has the plot that has really sold it for me, so I'm really hoping this one is like a 5 out of 5 star. Described as achingly atmospheric and wonderfully sharp, this story follows our main character Effie, and she has been plagued by dreams of the Fairy King her entire life, forcing her to believe that fairy tales are in fact true. The only thing really keeping her afloat is her favorite novel, which basically describes the story of a young mortal girl who marries the immortal Fairy King and then ultimately kills him. At the beginning of the story, there's actually a contest announced to basically travel to this late author's home to redesign his estate, and our main character Effie is thrilled to be a part of this. When she arrives though, she meets a grumpy young literary student who is determined to basically prove that this author's legacy is a lie. They don't like each other at first, but when unlikely events begin to occur around the estate, they're forced to work together and take on impossible tasks. Again, I just feel like so many inputs about this book seem incredibly intriguing to me and something I would really like. I feel like this could be an absolute home run, but again, there's only one way to find out, so I do hope to read this too. The next book that is on my TBR are The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik. This is the third and final book to the School-a-Man series, which I also have flown through rather recently. The first one being A Deadly Education. This series has just completely endeared itself to me. The concept of it is so interesting. Basically, this is set in a fantasy world where there are magic users, and when you are a young magic user, your life is incredibly dangerous because you attract monsters who try to eat you. To try to solve this problem, the Magical Society has created something called the School-a-Mans, a school where young people can go, learn, and basically graduate and enter back into society more protected. However, though, the school, while less dangerous than the outside world, where you kind of have a 1 in 20 shot of survival, is still incredibly dangerous with a 1 in 4 shot of survival. resulting in alliances being formed, kids being incredibly untrustworthy with one another, and overall just a situation that is very traumatic and dark in terms of an everyday educational vibe, if you get my meaning. In this series, we follow our main character, Elle, who is a self-declared loner and also harboring a big secret, and that is she has incredibly powerful but like dangerous magic that kind of wants her to like end the world, which she refuses to do. Throughout this series, we see her take on her own magical education and also sort of begrudgingly make friends, take on kind of the rules and the institution of the School of Mance itself, and it's just so unbelievably captivating. Structurally, I love how this book is written. It's very like stream of consciousness, and you just very quickly fall in love with the main character. I love the first two books. I flew through them. I'm really excited to see how the whole thing is going to wrap up. The sequel, The Last Graduate, ended with quite the bang, so I'm very nervous to see how this plot is going to unfurl itself, especially because a lot of you guys have left me some comments that have made me rather nervous, but I gotta read it. I gotta see for myself. The next book that's on my list is a literary fiction option that I think I'm gonna be reading with my friend, and that is The Bee Sting, which I believe has been shortlisted for the Man Booker this year. I've heard a lot of buzz about this book. A lot of people really seem to love it. It also, again, kind of has elements to the plot that really call out to me. In particular, this is a family saga, but also a very, very strange family saga about a family curse. And through this story, we're reading from all the different members of one family and trying to go back in time to see like where this curse started and if it's possible to reverse it. But in this book, we follow the Barnes family, and they are in trouble. Dickie, the father's once very lucrative and successful like used car business, has gone under, and instead of trying to fix it, he has been spending his days in the woods building an apocalyptic proof bunker with a renegade handyman. We also follow his wife, Imelda, who was selling off her jewelry on eBay and half-heartedly dodging the attentions of a fast-talking cattle farmer. We also have their teenage daughter, Cass, who was formerly at the top of her class but seems determined to binge drink her way through the final exams. And lastly, their 12-year-old son, PJ, who's in debt to the local sociopath. Again, a lot going on here in the synopsis. I'm intrigued by it. This is a longer literary fiction book, but I really feel like it's going to be captivating, dark, and strange. So yeah, I'm excited to pick this book up, but kind of a change of pace from all of the fantasy I have been reading recently. The next book that's on my list is my IRL book club pick, and we selected The Only One Left by Riley Sager, which I'm so excited to be picking up. Not only is this a perfect, very seasonally appropriate read, but it's also a gothic horror story, and I simply cannot get enough of gothic horror at the moment. I have read so many books in the past 2 months, like within this genre, and I only want more. So I'm really looking forward to picking this up and discussing it with my friends and you guys. But this is Riley Sager's newest release, which I've actually never read a book by this author before, but this book is set in kind of like 2 different timelines in one small town in Maine. Basically, in 1929, there was a very rich and affluent family living on the top of a hill within this town, and all of the members of the family died in a really brutal fashion except their daughter. And everyone in the town assumes that the daughter has killed off this entire family, despite the fact that she was never charged for it. So much so that like local legend has ballooned in such a way that there's even like nursery rhymes about her and her committing this crime. Fast forward to the 1970s, this daughter has now reached old age and she needs a new caretaker to come to her home to help her around the house. She herself is bound to a wheelchair and can no longer communicate verbally. So needless to say, her caretaker was very surprised when she writes out on her typewriter if they want to know what really happened that fateful night. And from there begins the story. And I believe, again, we shuffle back and forth in time, dark, creepy house, small town, gossip and conspiracy, gothic horror story. Again, one of my favorites. I've heard this book has many, 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 many twists. Be like shocked, pulled through the story, unable to put down, all of those things. So I'll also be reading this. And then the last book that's on my TBR, though, to be fair, there are many books not mentioned that I also want to read. So again, we'll just see how this month unfolds, is The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. I read Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young in August and loved it. It was so atmospheric and creepy and strange and just absolutely transporting that I feel like her new release will also be a perfect fall read too. This book is set in a small small mountain town in North Carolina, and we follow June, our main character. And she is a part of a very well-known family, known for their not only beautiful and very successful flower farm, but also for the curse that has been haunting their family for generations. This curse has resulted also in the disappearance of her mother many years prior to the start of this novel, a mystery that has never been solved and has haunted June ever since. At the beginning of this book, it's been a year since June has started seeing and hearing things that aren't really there. But June is determined to end this curse that has been plaguing her family once and for all. And after she starts receiving like cryptic clues about it, I believe we begin to unravel this mystery altogether. Not only do I believe this book has a journey and family component, I do believe it also has a romance element too. I just feel like Adrienne Young does such a fantastic job with these small town settings that are strange and mysterious and magical, with really gripping and like melodramatic writing that I find so compulsive when I read it. So this book also comes out in October and I want to read it right away. Alrighty guys, that is my October TBR. Please let me know down below some books you hope to get to this month, as I would truly love to know. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!